je vous servirai avec amour. Vive la République! Vive la France!
We're going to see a huge change. A new order will come through. It's amazing.
Hello and welcome to the special edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. We're live for you from Paris. It's just about 24 hours since, at 8 o'clock local time, just as it is now, yesterday, the results came in for the French second round of the presidential elections. Some thought it would be close. They were wrong. 66% of the vote went to Emmanuel Macron, a 39-year-old man who's considered an outsider, up against somebody else who was also considered an outsider and someone who would really disrupt the system. There was fear, there was agitation, there was excitement, but in the end, the man they call the centrist won, and he won very clearly. Over the next hour, we'll have a range of panelists and analysts as we will explore what this means, not only for France, which is a divided society, but the continent and also the political movements across the world. To bring us up to speed for now with how we got here and just who is this man, Emmanuel Macron, here's my colleague, Randolph Noble.
Accompanied only by his own shadow, a man without a party in parliament strode center stage. At the Louvre in Paris, the bright strains of Beethoven's Ode to Joy rang out. An ode also perhaps to France's embrace of its European identity.
Vous l'avez emporté! La France l'a emporté!
After an election that exposed deep divisions in French society, it was a clear victory and a resounding no to the politics of his firebrand far-right opponent, Marine Le Pen. Only a few kilometers away at the National Front campaign headquarters, there was an air of solidarity in the face of defeat.
Ce second tour organise une recomposition politique de grande ampleur autour du clivage entre les patriotes et les mondialistes.
The election was framed as a choice between Emmanuel Macron and staying in the EU, or Marine Le Pen and a possible Frexit. But beyond that choice lay an economic reality borne out in the polls. Macron swept the electoral map, taking all but 2 of France's 107 departments or regions. But Le Pen performed well in the southeast, a National Front stronghold, and in the northeast, where her anti-globalization platform resonated. There, and in other areas where unemployment topped 10%, she won more than 40% of the vote. But in areas where joblessness was less than 10%, she fared much worse. Le Pen appealed in places ravaged by deindustrialization. Her message that the EU is to blame and that refugees threaten France's national identity and could lead to more terror attacks didn't gain as much traction as she'd hoped. But she brought her party from the fringes into the mainstream political fold. When her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, ran for president in 2002, he garnered only 18% of the vote. Le Pen got 34%. A sign that the grievances of those who feel forgotten have not been swept away by this election result. And that Macron, the youngest president in France's history, will not only have a tough opposition, but tough challenges to tackle as a relative political novice. To many, it seems, Emmanuel Macron came out of nowhere. He launched his centrist En Marche, or On the Move, in April last year. And since then, his dramatic rise has astonished France's political establishment. The 39-year-old has never held elected office. He was the economy minister for one of the most unpopular leaders in modern French history, outgoing President François Hollande. But Macron has had a few things going for him. A tumultuous election, one which saw the one-time favorite François Fillon's 10-point lead evaporate under the spotlight of a financial scandal. And Macron has charisma. He's managed to inspire hope, but his past as an investment banker and his pro-business leanings have some on the left concerned. He'll now have to prove that he can back up his smooth talk with action, something for which success in parliamentary elections in June is vital. He'll need seats and votes to push forward his emerging political movement. And he'll need to bring in the disaffected, or risk a return of a far-right party that has in recent years only become stronger. Randolph Nogle, The Newsmakers.
Okay, it's worthwhile taking stock how we got here, how Macron managed to get 66% of the vote, and also one of the big questions I have, how come so many people here abstained from voting, and for some, they saw it as a tactical vote rather than a principled vote? Lots of questions, lots to get through. We've brought together some of the best minds around to help us dive deeper and analyze, because everybody wants to know what this means. It's a pleasure to introduce Anne Le Breton, who's the Deputy Mayor of the 4th District in Paris and a Macron supporter. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Nabila Ramadani. Nabila, it's good to meet you in person. We've spoken down the barrel of the camera many, many times. Award-winning French-Algerian journalist, columnist and broadcaster who specializes in French politics, Islamic affairs and the Arab world. Okay, so let's look at where we are right now and how we got here. And 24 hours on, the new president's already lying. He said he'll be warming and welcoming to foreigners, but look at this weather. I'm really disappointed.
I have to tell you one thing. My daughter was born this week in May, a long time ago, and it was 38 degrees.
Really?
So you've really just not lucky at all.
The weather's miserable.
No, this is not
bad signs 24 hours on, I must say.
That's not the usual weather for May, and so please,
so tell me,
come.
Let's be serious. Tell me why he won.
I think because there was a profound desire in France for change and for a positive change. And that might be the major reason of his success.
Wasn't it more just not voting for Le Pen? Anyone but Le Pen, so let's vote for this guy because he's not as bad for two-thirds of French people?
Because there was a first round, and we were really ahead in the first round. So the second round, it's different, of course, because there was the Marine Le Pen element. But the first round, we were ahead of the other parties. So there was a real movement in our favor, and a real enthusiasm for a project that's completely different, and that offers a real prospect to France, and a positive prospect.
Were you worried at any moment in time that it was probably going to be close?
Well, a year ago we didn't even exist. So of course, right. A year ago we thought we had a very small opening, but there was no guarantee. And as things started, picking up and moving, and thousands of people were working, and we had, people helping us campaign everywhere, there was a real momentum. And anybody who participated in this campaign can tell you there was a real momentum. And so, no, we were not that surprised at the end by the result. Of course we were scared, but we felt it coming.
Nabila, why did Le Pen do so badly when there was a prospect of it being close? I mean, people were making Brexit and Trump comparisons, saying, don't be so complacent, you never know, it's an age of populism. Why did she fizzle out?
Well, you're quite right to highlight the fact that she was expected to win in the first round of the presidential election, and she in fact lost against Macron, who came on top. I have always argued that Le Pen was effectively riding an artificial populist wave, and she felt emboldened by the Brexit and indeed the Trump factors. But what she has managed to do, really, is to muster her core voters, who traditionally range between 15% and 30% at the most. And that's what she's managed to do. So there was no surprise there. She didn't manage to expand her base. And it has to be said that the reason why she got through to the second round is because of the political crisis at the heart of the French democracy. The very fact that the party of de Gaulle, of traditional France, was represented by a convicted criminal suspect didn't help, and the fact that the left effectively fragmented into three separate parties, the hard left with Mélenchon, the official socialist candidate with Benoît Hamon, and the more liberal social democrat with Emmanuel Macron. So the explosion of the left and the destruction of Fillon allowed to both Macron and indeed Le Pen to make it to the second round. And the reason why Macron has indeed succeeded in the end is a combination of several factors. He's an attractive property in many ways, not only in terms of image, but also an intellectual property. There is no doubt that he's telegenic, he's charismatic, and he also has very bright ideas. But there is no doubt that there would have been no possibility of him winning this election if it wasn't for that political crisis. And he got very lucky indeed.
So there is a political crisis, and again, and it's sort of as if your team won, but it was because the opposition scored so many own goals. Because you have so many of these people who were just apathetic, they weren't interested. Many people were debating whether they were going to vote for Macron at all. So for those that did, would you accept that they did it without any passion or love? It was just that he wasn't Le Pen.
No, I have a different analysis.
Tell me.
I think that Macron had this intuition that if he didn't come out and do something else, nobody would win the election, and that she might win the election. So because he felt very strongly that the divisions on the left were so strong that they would never manage to get a candidate into power next time. But he also felt there was the same strong divisions on the right. Because he saw those two old parties crumbling, he knew there was an opportunity for something else, and he felt it. There's been citizens movement starting for the last 3, 4, 5 years. There was something simmering there for a long time. He had that intuition. He went forward. He tried to do something, and he succeeded.
He tapped into it. He succeeded undoubtedly. He's 39 years old, and he's the president of France now. He's got a massive laundry list of challenges ahead. We're going to look at them for the duration of the next 50 minutes or so. They are political, they are economic, they are in many ways sometimes cultural, they involve security. He's been called weak on security. The other side is saying that he's going to weaken France and allow it to be attacked by terrorists. This man has massive challenges ahead. Here's my colleague Yvette McCullough to give you a taste of some of those that he will face.
France's new president is set to inherit an unprecedented security challenge. Emmanuel Macron was elected under a state of emergency, while the country remains a target of terror attacks on its soil. More than 230 people have been killed in attacks in France since January 2015, most carried out by Daesh or its sympathisers. Just days before the first round of elections came a sobering reminder of the threat, as a police officer was killed on the Champs-Élysées. Fear of these attacks has led to a rise in Islamophobia in parts of France, a climate Marine Le Pen tried to capitalise on. But Macron has a completely different vision for dealing with the threat. He wants to do more to accommodate refugees and integrate Muslim minorities to prevent radicalisation. And he says he'll be tough on terrorism.
Je dis à tous que la France sera au premier rang de la lutte contre le terrorisme sur son sol, aussi bien que dans l'action internationale.
Protecting against this rising threat is taking its toll on France's security forces. Is Macron equipped to make tough security choices with limited resources? And will he be able to bring together a nation divided by fear and anger? For most French voters, there's an even bigger threat to the country's security and stability: its economy. Unemployment in France is high and has been for decades. Currently sitting at around 10%, it's above the Eurozone average and more than double the levels in Germany and the UK. For young people in France, almost a quarter don't have jobs. The Pen blames outside forces and immigration for France's economic woes, calling for it to embrace isolationism. But Macron has pitched himself as the pro-globalisation revolutionary, pro-trade, pro-EU and pro-immigration. But Macron's most immediate challenge will be ensuring his new movement, En Marche or On the Move, keeps its momentum for next month's parliamentary elections.
Notre tâche est immense et elle imposera de construire dès demain une majorité vraie, une majorité forte. Cette majorité de changement, c'est ce à quoi le pays aspire et c'est ce qu'il mérite.
Will Macron's centrist approach help him succeed where other presidents have failed? And will he be able to unify and lead France in the face of these challenges? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Okay, so Nabila, you say, he's an attractive, what do you say, human property, attractive human property on multiple levels, right? Here's a guy who's an impressive character, intellectually, he looks good and so on. But for many on the far left and on the far right, they saw him as a little smarmy, a little smug, a little condescending, a little elitist, right? On the left and the right. How's he going to change that image for them as president?
Well, I think for a start, he's worked extremely hard on his image, and he's always been honest about who he was. He's a provincial Frenchman from Amiens who came to Paris to make an awful lot of money as a Rothschild banker. But he kept his roots, and he made that abundantly clear. He speaks very passionately about where he comes from and where he grew up, and it's very much part and parcel of his identity. But I think he's also defined himself as a pragmatist, as somebody who's not burdened by ideology, as a technocrat who wants to get things done and get stuck. And he wants to try and fix the very many structural, endemic problems of France. And he's a fresh-faced who is offering novel solutions, but it has to be said that he claims he's a centrist, he's neither of the left nor of the right, but throughout his campaign he dragged many figures of the left, and especially the socialists, including many senior socialist figures. In fact, out of the 24 departments who voted for him, 21 had voted for François Hollande, the socialist president, in 2012.
And he seemed to have been sort of anointed by François Hollande. And your party has never governed before. Is that a kind of liberation or a burden?
It is a liberation because it is going to allow us to choose a new representative. And so we're going to announce this week 577 candidates for the legislative election. Half of them are going to be people who already are who have been members of parliament, and the other half are going to come from the civil society and will never have been, member of parliament. And so this new way of doing politics is going to allow a tremendous renewal. What we had in France is we had kept the same political people for the last 30 years. Everybody knew their faces. It was very, very difficult to change things in France, a lot because of that. So even if that's the only thing we've done, and we will do a lot more, but it's a very important element. And what's going to happen is that the renewal of the people in the French politics. After the first round, and it was a short space of time, it's a really short space of time in this country between the one vote and then the other with the final round. It got a little ugly, it got a bit bitter, there was name calling. There were some, not many, but those who would, I guess, eventually vote for Macron, who saw Le Pen's group as just purely sort of far-right racists, xenophobes and so on. For those people who voted for Le Pen, more than 30% of French people, how does this president turn to them and say, I don't see you all as racist xenophobes, and I'm your president, and I care about your issues, especially the working class? So may I correct you just on one thing? It's not 30% of French people who voted, because there was a lot of people who actually didn't vote. So it's less than 30% of French people, and that makes a difference.
Okay.
And he was very clear, you know, that he will talk to those people, because we want to hear what they are saying. And they're saying various things. There are people from rural areas who feel they've been forgotten by French policies in the last, you know, 10, 20, 30 years, who are unemployed. That is the main question we have to address here. And we're very, very conscious that it's, you know, the most important challenge we have in front of us. And there are a lot of other things. You know, there are people who are afraid of globalization, who feel very foreign to globalization. They're far away from those, and so they need to be maybe, you know, educated to that idea. There's a lot of problems that we have to address with them, and that is going to be something we strongly want to do.
Nabila, security. Paris was attacked. It's still very raw for many people here. I walked out of my hotel the other day. I saw a memorial for the policeman who was killed very recently. Security is an issue. ISIS, Daesh, has made it an aim of theirs to attack France and the symbols of France, and because especially Paris represents so many symbols of the West. He was seen as weak on this by the Le Pen camp and not the guy to be tough on terrorism. Is that true?
Well, I think it's a very unfair criticism, because all the candidates involved in the presidential elections and anybody who claims to want to be president of France has to take security extremely seriously. And he effectively did. The number one duty of any head of state is to keep its citizens alive. And he made that clear, that security was a big issue. The difference between him and the far-right candidates, and by which I mean not only Marine Le Pen, but also François Fillon, who was increasingly on the far right, is that he considered security as one of the many issues that are facing France at the moment, and not the sole one by any means, whereas Marine Le Pen capitalized on the gunning down of a police officer, remember a few days before the first round, and wanted to turn it into the single big event of the campaign, calling for an ideological war against ISIS. Macron was a bit more circumspect, and he considered very pragmatic solutions, which is to say to work more efficiently with intelligence services and coordinate the different hierarchies within the police to try and foil such attack. And if I may, a week before, there was a similar attack by ISIS affiliated gunmen who wanted to kill presidential candidates, and it was foiled precisely because of the good works of intelligence and security combined.
Yeah, and I wish the National Front was here. We actually had someone confirmed for this program. After the results, they cancelled on us. It would have been nice to have a little bit of back and forth here regarding those accusations in terms of security. Unfortunately, they're not here. And you made an interesting point saying, you know, a lot of these voters are anti-globalization. It's fascinating and maybe a little ironic, I guess, that you have this movement supported by Nigel Farage, Bannon in America, trolls, the alt-right trolls on the internet, perhaps Putin's Russia. That sounds like a very global movement to me. Maybe I don't understand.
That's a very good argument.
That's the anti-globalization movement.
I will remember that.
I don't understand most of the stuff. It all confuses me. Now, the culture wars have been central as well to this election. Many French Muslims asking, is France a country for them? Many French people asking, is this a country for Muslims? Does France have a problem with Muslims? Do Muslims have a problem with France? Islamophobia and the concept of Islam and Muslim immigrants was central to this election. Take a look.
France is a country that has a feeling of being in decline, and losing its identity, and Islam is seen as invading the French identity and changing it. So it's something very irrational but very deeply rooted in the the French minds.
I'm very proud that my audience reflects France, and perhaps certain elites should take inspiration from that.
The truth is, I'm happy when people have a good time, and that they laugh together next to a woman wearing a headscarf, a Hindu, a Jew, and that altogether they enjoyed my jokes and laughed. We should laugh together, not at each other.
And joining the discussion now is Marwan Mohammed, who is the director of the Center Against Islamophobia in France. Marwan, good to have you on the program. There was an op-ed of yours, I think, and there's been some interesting viral videos of yours doing the rounds on social media. Presumably, you're happy because Le Pen's not president and she wasn't too keen on Muslims, but Macron is, yes?
Yes, when I look at the figures, I see that 11 million French citizens voted for Marine Le Pen, and that 16 million of them didn't even turn up at the voting polls. And this is no cause for celebration. That being said, I think that with a new president, that there is a new slate, and that we need to start from this reality, and that maybe with a level of pragmatism and professionalism, the new team in power will address the real discrimination that goes on in France. I don't give any blank check to any new president. I've learned better, and in my age at 38, 39 years old, I've seen a number of presidents coming in with a high level of support and not addressing the real issues, and these issues of structural discrimination against black minority, Arab minority, migrants and Muslim minorities haven't been addressed in the last generation. So I don't take anything for granted, but I give the benefit of trust to the new team coming in power and see what they are going to do in the first coming month.
And how do you feel about that? You've got to work for his vote.
Well, I don't think I don't quite agree with the structural discrimination. There are a lot of problems that are linked also with their colonial past and that were never addressed. So those questions have to be addressed because they're absolutely central to our possibility of reconciling the country. Because we never talked about the Algerian War. It's 50 years old now. It was finished 50 years ago, and it's kind of something that's lurking in the background and that people don't address. So Macron, he made a big statement about that, and it was quite controversial. But he saying that it was a crime against humanity. But the one thing he did is he actually put the subject on the table for the first time. And so this subject, I think now, because he's from a younger generation, he was born way after the end of the Algerian War, we will be able now to maybe address those questions, talk about them more amongst themselves, and maybe reconcile those memories. And so that is a key point into the living together with, the
but that's
Muslims.
one point still, right?
It's one point,
talking about the Algerian War doesn't necessarily mean you're sort of sorting out the relationship in the banlieue where young, especially Muslims, feel as if they don't really belong to French society.
Well, it's a key point in making people belong. Mm-hmm. It is really a key historical point. Mm-hmm. It's a job that should have been done 30 years ago and that was never done. And so there's, we have to, the people who are second generation Algerian, mostly, have to be able to find their place in the community and in the French history. Mm-hmm. And so that is really something that Macron is very conscious about and that he will be working on very, very much.
Nabila, were 34% of this electorate Islamophobes?
Well, I would say, you were asking earlier that Macron will have to deal with the FN voters. The question is, how will he be treating far-right members? How will he be dealing with hate and prejudice? We must be very honest about what the National Front stands for. It's a party that's intrinsically linked and, it has, to racism, anti-Semitism, political violence, and indeed fascism. And it's made up and founded, admittedly, by Marine Le Pen on the legacy of the Algerian War, effectively being angry and resentful.
That was her dad's party.
No, it is her party.
It a little bit.
She said it in an interview very recently, that the party was founded on people who are resentful about de Gaulle letting Algeria slip off the French Empire. And also, I'm sad to say, it was also built on people who are nostalgic and mythologize the Vichy government and the racism and anti-Semitism that come with it. So it will be very difficult for Emmanuel Macron to interact and indeed deal with that fringe of society, because they're not interested in interacting with different people.
You say fringe of society. It's interesting because, so Marwan, maybe this is a glass half empty way to approach it. But when her dad ran against Jacques Chirac, he was demolished and he got 18% of the vote. Now she's got 34% of the vote in the final round. Does that worry you?
Marine Le Pen's biggest victory and the Front National biggest victory is not a numerical output of the election, it's the way through which the Front National has imposed its political agenda, asking the wrong question, and the rest of the politicians feeling that they have to answer, and recoding the problematization of minorities into the mainstream agenda. Now we start from a sociological reality, a reality where being black or being Arab makes you have 8 more chances of being racially selected by the police in the street.
But Anne says it's not systemic, or as systemic as you mentioned.
Well, actually, it is systemic, because if you are from these minorities, you have not equal access to education or work, and you don't have the same relationship with the police. And this police sort of racial profiling is still going on. Same with the access to work. If you have a Muslim-sounding name, you have 4 chances less of getting an interview. So when these type of discriminatory behavior keeps going on generation after generation, it's not a matter of political symbolism anymore, it's a structural problem. I agree very much with what has been said by Mr. Breton, that from a symbolic perspective, it is so important to make sure that everybody feels included in the common narrative of what it means to be French, but we are going to come short if we don't follow this by actual policies who address the sociological reality of the country.
And in a nutshell, in a sentence or two, if the president called you in, sat you down, said, Marwan, give me some advice. How do I fix this systemic problem? What must he do?
Well, actually, if I look at the cases, every year we handle 1,000 cases overall of discrimination and hate crime. Take away the hate crimes which need to be dealt with at the police and justice level. Most of discrimination cases are solved through mediation, by making sure that people are aware of their rights and that people are included. If on the training of civil servants, of police officers, of people who work in actual administration, we were to make sure that people having a headscarf are included, people growing a beard are included and not dealt with as criminals, we would avoid 2/3 of the cases that we have to deal with. So I think that Emmanuel Macron, I will give him the benefit of the doubt when he says that he's pragmatic. Being pragmatic means also dealing and working with civil society organizations to make sure that we address these real-time cases.
Yeah, such big questions over what it means to be French, especially for minorities. As an outsider, it fascinates me. Marwan, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. We're going to have some musical chairs after the break. Nabila, you're going to leave us and then come back near the end, and you're staying where you are. We've got to take a break. Keep on watching the special edition of the Newsmakers live from a not-so-sunny Paris, and it's quite chilly as well. Stay with us. Welcome back to the special edition of the Newsmakers live from Paris, 24 hours on, after the results came in that showed that Emmanuel Macron got 66% of the vote, and he'll be the next president of France. Fascinating times in this country, and as we've been discussing, so many challenges ahead for the entire country and its new president, who's a young man, 39 years old. Now, on the other side of the fence, you had Marine Le Pen on the far right. There were fears from those who don't like the far right that France was swinging into a direction that was significant, and it was an indication of a trend that had been bubbling and happening on the entire continent for the past 6 or 7 years. The far right is here, it's on the scene, and that's where all of Europe is going. That was one of the things being said. But is that really true? And is Macron's victory perhaps signaling a different change of direction? Let's have a look at the continent and some of the far-right movements over the past few years in multiple countries to see where we are with my colleague Shoaib Hassan.
12 countries in the 28-member European Union have seen a surge in popularity of far-right political parties in the last 10 years. And recently, neutral Switzerland joined them, voting heavily in favor of the Swiss People's Party. It won 29% of the popular vote on the back of a campaign to stop the construction of mosques in the country. That makes it second in Europe only to Austria's Freedom Party, whose candidate Norbert Hofer lost the presidential election by a margin of 0.6%, a mere 30,000 votes in 2016. Others include Greece's neo-Nazi Golden Dawn, whose popularity has seen its vote bank rise in 2015, even though its top leaders are behind bars on charges of murdering an anti-fascist singer in 2013. And there's also Hungary's Jobbik. It operates armed anti-immigrant squads on its borders. But the biggest jump in terms of voters has been for the Front National in France, from a mere 4.3% in 2007 to nearly 28% in 2015 in regional elections. And despite the defeat of party chief Marine Le Pen by now President-elect Emmanuel Macron, that trend has continued, with the front winning nearly 34% of the vote, its highest ever tally.
Okay, joining me now is Pierre Haski, who's a journalist and co-founder of Rue 89. So it's been a pleasure inviting you to the program.
Thank you.
Every French person I spoke to, when I told them you're going to be on the program, they said, wow, this is fantastic, we've got Pierre Haski. So the question is, will they be popping the champagne corks in Brussels today?
Of course.
Yeah.
They did already last night. You know, it was such a traumatic event for them, because and for us, obviously, but for the whole of Europe, because if Marine Le Pen had won, it was the end of Europe, because France, you know, is a founding member of the European Union, is a core country in the Eurozone. It's the second economy in the Eurozone. And if Marine Le Pen had not even implemented her plan, but just been elected, there would have been a huge crisis on the continent. And I think this was the reason why this election attracted so much attention all over the place. And also because you had Brexit, you had Trump, and everybody then said, okay, it's a domino effect. Next time it's Marine Le Pen.
So yeah, people see these patterns. They talk of Brexit, they talk of Trump, they look at the far right in Austria, they saw that Geert Wilders in the Netherlands was looking good for the election over there. So it was a good story, and it was a dangerous story for many. But then things seem to change a little bit. In the Netherlands, the far right didn't do that well. Here, Emmanuel Macron got 66% of the vote. When you look at the continent, and I know what you're going to say here, did the far right hit its peak and now it's plateauing? Is the centre fighting back?
The centre is definitely fighting back. That was the core of our project. And so I agree with you. It started with Holland. And, you know, I think what happened with Trump kind of sent a shockwave to the whole world, where people said, we can't just let this happen by chance. Something has to be done. And I really strongly believe, and in a way I hope, that this is the swan song of Marine Le Pen, that next time she will not be able to remotely make it into, you know, being one of the contenders.
What if her niece Marion Le Pen comes out and she's more charismatic and, you know, a couple of years' time they have even more support?
It's not a question of who carries the project. It's more a question of, do you believe it? Because when she comes, Marine Le Pen, and says that she's going to protect France and put, you know, and kind of seal off France from immigration, people now are starting to realize that she's lying, and you know, she's lying like that about everything else in her program. How do you want to put, you know, sealed off borders around a country that has thousands of kilometers of sea, mountains on three sides?
But let's ask Pierre. 34% of people who voted still believe her story. Does that disturb you?
Do they believe her story, or do they express anger?
Oh.
And that's really the key issue. If they believe her story, we are in deep trouble.
Okay.
If it's a question of anger, and I use the word anger on purpose, Emmanuel Macron in his first speech last night used the word anger. And these people maybe have some reasons to be angry. We have developed a path of globalization in this country that has created a lot of inequalities, regional inequalities, social inequalities that we haven't solved, we haven't even addressed.
Let me try and
that's the big challenge for Macron.
Let me try and understand this properly. There are those who voted for her not because they actually, maybe ideologically or even politically, invested in her ideas, but because they just wanted to give the system a bloody nose.
If I'm correct, maybe I'm not, but the difference between the score reached by her father in 2002, that's 18%, and almost double number of votes that she got this time is due to the fact that, first of all, she changed the program. She introduced an anti-globalization platform. She became a social activist in a way. You know, she's picked a lot of elements of program from the left, and even her speech, the key words, she's fighting against oligarchy. Right. You know, this kind of vocabulary.
The right wing is complaining about capitalism.
Yes,
this is
exactly.
Unique, right?
And I think she has attracted. There have been more workers who voted for her yesterday than for Emmanuel Macron, and that says a lot, you know, because these are the groups that have felt the pinch of globalization. You know, there was this skirmish about the Whirlpool factory. You know, both candidates went to the same day to one factory that is closing down and outsourced in Poland. And she went there and she said, "Oh, I'm going to save your jobs." She did a few selfies and everybody applauded. And then Emmanuel Macron came with a reasonable speech, which is not solving miraculously the problem.
But reasonable doesn't work in politics.
Yes, but he won in the end. So that's a miracle of Emmanuel Macron. But what I mean is that if you address the anger of workers who get, you know, the factory closed, out of job because of the competition between different social systems and so on, within the same entity, which is the European Union, and that's really the core issue. And you get easy solutions. You say, "Oh, I'm going to save your jobs. I'm going to put borders." Obviously, you capture that vote, but you don't solve anything because no one can believe that what she told the workers would work. And she probably knew herself that she would not have to implement it when she said it. So that was the trick. But so at stake is not so much that people believe that Marine Le Pen has the solutions. It's just that they found out that the best way to express anger, to attract the attention of Paris, because we are a very centralized country, is also to do that, to vote for the worse, I could say.
Yeah, and let's look ahead now for a moment and look at how the next president, Emmanuel Macron, would actually deal with foreign policy. One of the things on his agenda will be the continent of Africa. France, a former colonial power that influenced the lives of tens of millions of people in the past and today on the continent. France still has many bases in Africa and a lot of influence on the continent. The two candidates had very differing visions of how France should act on the continent and in foreign countries in general. Let's have a look for a second at where France is in Africa and where it might be.
France has more than 3,000 soldiers stationed in Africa. They're deployed in Mali, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad. Thousands of other French soldiers are part of UN African peacekeeping operations. The French president-elect, Emmanuel Macron, wants to withdraw all of them, except for UN troops. That's likely to take the pressure off militant groups. In particular, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb stands to gain. French troops chased them out of Mali in 2013, but their withdrawal could allow such groups to return.
And Nabila has now rejoined the conversation as we push towards the end here and look forward now. And we used Africa, I guess, as a microcosm, right? Because foreign policy means everywhere, but Africa is particularly unique. And one of the things about Francois Hollande is that many people expected him as a socialist and for many other reasons to not really be that much involved on the continent. He seemed to get sucked in because of other events in places like Mali. Can we actually tell how Macron is going to rule and how it's going to be in terms of foreign policy under his presidency, Nabila?
Well, it's very difficult because it has to be said he hasn't made much of foreign policy during his campaigning. But what he made clear is that he's very much of an internationalist, of a globalist. He has an interest in what's happening all over the world, and he wants to have good relationships with all countries and indeed be pragmatic about sorting out world affairs, not least of all global terrorism, for example. He has a very, very clear view about how he wants to interact with different countries. And he's been very good on, the legacy of colonialism. As Anne Le Breton mentioned earlier, he went to Algeria. He described, the period of colonization as crimes against humanity. He was very brave on that. And he is not just trying to win nationalist sympathies by pretending that nasty things didn't happen in the past. So he has to be commanded on this front. And I think now we'll start seeing him more traveling to foreign countries when he will be inaugurated, and we'll know more about his approach to the rest of the world.
Pierre, very briefly, because we are running out of time, how do you envision his foreign policy? The man endorsed by Barack Obama, does that give us an indication, maybe?
He has criticized the way foreign interventions were made by France in the past 10 years. He has expressed proximity, intellectual proximity with Dominique de Villepin. Dominique de Villepin is a former foreign minister and prime minister of Jacques Chirac, who was famous for having said no to the Bush administration in 2003 when they wanted to invade Iraq. And I was very struck by that sentence when Emmanuel Macron thought that we had done too many interventions that were maybe not well thought, and he specifically referred to Libya. And I think, coming back to your point about Africa, I think he has a vision of a French presence in Africa that is different from the past 40, 50 years where we've had, kind of neo-colonial influence in Africa. I think the generation gap that he is introducing is really bringing something fresh. He's not affected, he's not influenced by the colonial past, by that side of history, which
and
is
he's
sometimes
just so young. Yeah.
Yes, but that's it can be a drawback, but it can also be an asset.
And globalist, not a populist nationalist, that's for sure. A positive foreign policy, you hope?
Yes, and I think he intends to rely very much on the states and work with them on stability and peace. He wants to work a lot with the African Union. He has given a very interesting interview about what he sees as his African policy in a magazine that's called Jeune Afrique, where he did say, he gave a few, so he did say that he didn't think it was going to be possible to leave Mali right away, that he was going to call a G5 meeting with Europe also. I think it's going to be much, I agree with Pierre Haski, it's going to be much more of an inclusive policy, and we're going to work away from our old colonial African policy.
Yeah. One thing that does seem to be for certain is that any questions or big question marks that have been hung over the future of France in the European Union or NATO and so on, that's off the table now for the foreseeable future, right? Yep.
Yes.
I mean, I guess everybody is...
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, we would have been asking very different questions had Le Pen won. Might have been a more interesting program tonight. I don't know. Yeah, but it's been a pleasure talking to all of you on the program. It's Anne Le Breton, Nabila Ramdani, Pierre Haski, and earlier Marwan Mohammed. So many questions. Looking ahead, legislative elections the week beginning June the 11th, and you'll be running, right?
I've put my candidacy in where I'm waiting for the answer. We have absolutely no guarantee.
We shall be following the story closely, looking for your name, Googling your name on a weekly basis. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been fascinating getting an insight into French society from some of its sharpest minds. Thank you for joining us, yes, on our special edition of the Newsmakers. Live from Paris, Emmanuel Macron's the French president. Let's see how he'll do. We'll be keeping him honest, and we'll be following his presidency and all its ramifications on the Newsmakers in the coming weeks, months, and years. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye from all of us.